Peace be upon you. We wish you Ramadan Kareem. I'm pleased to welcome you to this symposium, which is a result of a partnership between Al-Ittihad newspaper and Trends Research and Advisory. We are discussing a very important topic, an important topic for all the government of the world, and it is the apps and digital platforms, the threat of extremist misuse, the internet. And the social media in general, and all the digital platforms, in addition to the electronic applications, became a very efficient tool in the spread of extremist ideas. And it is the favorite tool for all the users of the ideological battles, and use that in order to spread the extremism and also the hawkish policies politically. And these groups can develop very important, and they can reach out several places and destinations in order to spread their ideologies. And of course, among those are the political Islam, like the Muslim Brotherhood and other groups. And also, there is the far right parties in Europe, as we noticed in the past. These digital platforms and electronic applications have been equipped to reach the maximum number of people. So the misuse of these digital platforms and applications have a lot of risks and threats to the security of the societies, in addition to their impact on the moderation and also the human fraternity in the humanity. It's why confronting this is a joint responsibility by the international community, because it is a guarantee in the security of the world. So, our symposium today aims at shedding light on this digital community, which is used by such groups, and will shed light on the misuse of extremists of these digital platforms and electronic applications. So, how can we build a network in order to immunize our societies and communities from these misuses? Now, without further ado, I invite Mr. Hamad Al-Ka'bi, editor-in-chief of Al-Ittihad newspaper, to give his speech. You have the floor. Peace be upon you. Ladies and gentlemen, in the beginning, I would like to welcome you to this symposium that is the opening of the Al-Ittihad Ramadan Majlis. It is a routine that we follow, and we chose to start with this symposium in partnership with the Trends Research and Advisory. And in this symposium, we will shed light on the threat of extremist misuse of applications and digital platforms. As you know, these platforms became a reality, so we have to coexist with it, but we need to minimize the risks of these platforms. As you know, there is 4.2 billion users of the social media throughout the world, and this means that the interaction is very huge and tremendous, and of course this means that the extremists can use that, utilize the data in order to spread different goods and ideologies, etc. And it is very clear now that the applications and the digital platforms represent a challenge even to the media outlets, because they represent a threat and a risk on the survival of these media outlets. And when we see these groups spreading some misleading information, Of course, this is a risk and a threat, and we should raise awareness among the audiences in order to immunize them to face all those who try their best to use these platforms to destabilize the peoples and community and prevent their misleading information spread. I hope that the presentations of our guests will give some answers to these questions and give a kind of a recipe to these societies in order to prevent them from these floods and the tsunami of the misleading information. I would like to thank you for accepting our invitation to this symposium, and I'm grateful to your input in advance, and thank you very much. Thank you very much, Hamad. Now I give the floor to Dr. Muhammad Al Ali, CEO of Trends Research and Advisory. You have the floor, Doctor. Peace be upon you. In the beginning, I would like to thank Hamad Al Kaabi and all the guests who are participating with us in this symposium. And Ramadan Kareem. We wish you all the best in this blessed Ramadan. I would like to thank all the guests and experts who are participating in this important symposium, which discusses one of the major topics that are related to the stability and security of our peoples and societies, which is the threat of extremist misuse of apps and digital platforms, and especially by the extremist and the terrorist groups who try their best to spread some destroying ideas that are preventing the coexistence and acceptance. And of course, these are the values which we embrace. No one can argue that these apps and digital platforms represented a revolution in the new media and decrystallized a lot of trends in different peoples and communities. And as we see, there is an increasing use of this media. We can mention that half population of the world have accounts in the social media, which means that these tools have a great speed and capability of spreading the information, which means that they are efficient in embodying the awareness and the conscious of the peoples. So these digital platforms and electronic applications have unfortunately been turned into a destructive tool in the societies and the communities after their misuse by the Muslim Brotherhood and political Islam groups and terrorist groups which incite violence and hatred, and so violence among the peoples and communities. Countering this phenomenon is a joint responsibility of the entire international community, because we are all affected by this. And starting from the technological companies, which should revise their regulations that govern the social media and the electronic applications in order to prevent the extremists to use them, and also the international organization which counter the violent extremism and the hatred, and also the centers and institutions of education should collaborate their efforts in order to counter this misuse by the extremists of these apps and digital platforms. I'm quite sure that this symposium comes on time and that it will come up with some outcomes that will help the decision makers in order to deal with the repercussions of this phenomenon and immunize our societies. I would like also to thank Al-Ittihad newspaper for their cooperation in organizing this symposium, and this is a result of our partnership with them, with the Trend Research and Advisory, in order to enlighten the community and societies and shed light on all the topics that are related to our daily life. Thank you very much. Peace be upon you. Thank you, Dr. Muhammad Ali, CEO of Trend Research and Advisory. I thank you and I thank Hamad Al Kabi for your speeches because you set the framework for our symposium today, and we will have 1 hour and 10 minutes. We'll hear the inputs of a number of experts from the UAE and from the GCC Council. And these presentations will tackle 3 dimensions of the misuse of these platforms by extremists.
So we'll try to see as much as possible how to stop that. And we know that Muslim Brotherhood as well as Daesh has used these social platforms, and eventually we will also focus on the strategies that will be effective in order to protect the public from any ideological recruitment. First and foremost, I have the honor and privilege of welcoming Dr. Abdullah Al-Ghatami, the Professor of Criticism and Theory from the King Saud University. We know he's received a lot of medals in literature and in other fields. He has written several books, and he has really driven the public talk about this subject. Dr. Al-Ghatami has said that communication through digital platforms is trying in order to abuse language, and that culture has a role in order to stop everything that's spreading on social media. And this is why he has dedicated a book called The Culture of Twitter. Without any further ado, I will now give the floor for Dr. Al-Ghatami to explain to us what he had meant through that. Thank you so much for you. I would like to thank everyone from Al-Ittihad newspaper for hosting us and for choosing this very pertaining subject in a time where we need to discuss subject and manners, whether in terms of knowledge as well as experience that we have gained through these last years on social media. There are two major narratives. One is hate speeches, which includes racism and other things. But this is a legal matter, and countries should address it, and this is what's happening. Government, through their legal council, can make social media platforms delete all accounts that call for hate speech. However, the other aspect, which is not quite clear, which also calls for hate and for extremism from a soft perspective, might sound like something under things called human rights, women's rights, and under very major titles where they use the speech that they try to target people through. And through these narratives, we know that it is terroristic, meaning that it might lead to terrorism, which might lead to hate, and even if does not implement this terrorism itself, and does not use any hate speech. However, it tries as much as possible to use these means and techniques in order to hurt first emotions and reactions which might lead to a certain aspect of violence. So whether that this is a language, speech hate, or others. Najib Mahfouz was abused before being assassinated. And those who used those words had tried as much as possible to say in court that he does not did that, and nobody asked him to do that. So we see that there's a lot of people that are trying as much as possible to have impunity, and they are working as much as possible to do that. And social media platforms has eased the use of such speaks, which can be considered very negative. The countries have tried to have legal mechanisms in order to face that. However, they are still not clear, notably when we have narratives that are not quite clear. There's also a different aspect which is much more dangerous. By watching videos or reading posts, and I have already discussed the subject with one of our colleagues, we see how the people themselves act on Twitter, and I've written my book on Twitter. This is why all my research have focused on Twitter, although I started using Twitter in 2011, and I use it as a researcher and not for someone in order to use this social platform. And as I used this social media platform, I was capable of writing a book. On Twitter, we notice that countries that we can consider as equalitarian countries, meaning that the relation between the people and the government is on equal footing, we see that these Arab countries does not contain a lot of violent problems between the government and the people. After that, we see the moral army that is working. But we see that in a lot of countries, when there is a mistrust, it starts at the head of the pyramid and it breaks into the people. This is how the moral army works. There is no popular single unified opinion. If there is no single public opinion based on values, which is the unity of the country, the security of the country, the future of the country, the economics of the country, in these terms, we see that these headlines will be used as moral and ethical ammunition. And if the soldier in battle does not have any ammunition, he will not be able to work. If the people does not have any emotional and ethical ammunition, knowing that he has a country to protect, because we know that the collapse of the country will lead to the collapse of the individual. And if he does not know that he needs to protect the economy of the people, because it will reflect on his own economy and the economics of his house, and if he does not safeguard his future, they will lose the history of their country as a value. These four elements are available in countries where there is an equal relationship between the people and the government, even if they criticize the government for any reason. In Kuwait, we see that there are a lot of people that criticize the government. However, when anyone tries to tackle the essence of the country, we see that all the critics transform into moral soldiers. I focus on Kuwait because we always hear that there's the difference between the government and the people, but we know that the Kuwaiti people will always work on the best interests of their country. Now, there are also a lot of differences between the Kuwaiti newspaper and the people. Other Gulf countries are more harmonious between people and the government, and the criticism that's given to the government from the people is usually soft criticism. It's not very harsh. Dr. Abdullah, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you still have 1 minute. So this moral army acts, and since it does not represent the people, the government, and does not represent the economic, political, or other power, it represents himself. So person that tweets represents himself as well as a higher power that the other party will be concerned by, because they will try as much as possible to polarize these people, to attract them. And people that are liberal are the people that will be attracted. And we talked previously about the Muslim Brotherhood and other groups. I heard from friends that belong to the Muslim Brotherhood, and they said a very important sentence. they are happy and celebrate the people that spread their words more than the ideology of their group people, because the independent person is the one that can spread his message, and this is quite an important point. Any independent person in any environment becomes someone who is a messenger, and the people who is officially related to an entity becomes someone who's the formal. So the more a person is independent in his culture and his capacities and his judgmental ideas, he will become a member of the moral army that faces polarization and recruitment. Because if there is no polarization and if there is no attractiveness to the groups, people will not belong to them. We as free people, we need to stop extremism and polarization. We need to stop it from spreading. We need to stop any opportunities for it spreading. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much, Dr. Abdullah. This is a very important issues, and we will not be able to tackle them all in the short time that we have. However, hopefully, in the Q&A, maybe we might focus more on all the values we talked about with the moral army and how any free individual can contribute to this very big battle. Thank you so much for that. And now I would like to introduce our second speaker in the symposium, Muhammad Al-Mullah, who is a media advisor to the Kuwait Journalists Union in Kuwait. He is an intellectual, and he has written extensively on several topics in political Islam as well as public opinion. In his symposium on Muslim brotherhoods from Eurofatwa to the Clubhouse, Mr. Al-Mullah focuses on this Muslim Brotherhood and how it consolidated its propaganda since its establishment during the earliest 20th century, and how it spread in order to destabilize the communities as well as the security of the Arab countries. He also focuses on the different media strategies after it is no longer in power, while focusing on the mission of this group. So I now give the floor to Muhammad Al-Mullah in order to give us further details about this matter. Thank you so much for you. I would like first and foremost to thank Transfer Research and Advisory for inviting me. I would like also to thank Dr. Muhammad Al-Ali as well as everyone else, including Mr. Hamad Al-Ka'bi, for inviting us. We can talk from the Muslim Brotherhood, from the Eurofatwa to the Clubhouse. Brothers, when we talked about political Islam or its aspect, the people that created these terms are the Muslim Brotherhood, as well as any other groups that worked on destroying this Arab nation. They tried as much as possible to hijack religion to become the speakers of this debate, and they wanted to change the values and change their opinions according to their own agenda, as well as the 25 articles of the Constitution of the Muslim Brotherhood that were written by Hassan al-Banna. So we need to understand how the Muslim Brotherhood work, or any other groups that follows in the same footsteps. They built their constitution, they put a vision, and they started working through collective work that we have lost it for many years in our Arab countries. The collective popular work. They did not work with the powers, but they talked with their fan base. They started working through influencing the simple people. They were impacted by religion. They went to the villages, and the people that were easily influenced by these religious preaching. This is why they created what is called cells. These cells have different roles, and any individual in the Muslim Brotherhood has a role. And they try to use their narratives in order to attract people. So when they attract people and they brainwash them with the ideas of the Muslim Brotherhood, which have quite extremist ideas, they will try spreading these ideologies within their families. And they will be able to influence the neighbors, the immediate family, as well as the greater family, and such ideology will spread. Then they moved to mosques. They infiltrated the mosques. Even in Kuwait, in the beginning of the 1980s, they used to say that this or that Muslim is for the Muslim Brotherhood or for the Salafist. It's like they have hijacked these mosques according to their own political ideologies, and this is quite dangerous. And we did not know why they used to follow them. We did not know that we were being brainwashed. This is quite the reality. They try to infiltrate our people, and after that, they tried as much as possible to use the media. They started with the caritative organizations. In Egypt, they started quite simply. They were helping through giving a certain modest amount of money or helping someone with their projects. After that, they moved to charities. And after that, they started communicating with other countries such as Jordan, Tunisia, Libya, Pakistan, India, and Iran. We shouldn't forget that in 1988, Al-Khamenei have met Hassan al-Manna, and that he met the Muslim Brotherhood in the 40s and the 50s. And we know that that were books that were written about that. They were quite smart in how to communicate and attract people. After they finished controlling the simple people, they started as much as possible to attract as much as possible the youth, the creative, the excellent, and those who have good speeches in order to be able to work on their own ideologies, in order to bend the ideas, in order to reach the goals that they have set. Dr. Saeed Ramadan have used a lot of Muslim Brotherhood youth, and they started as much as possible to hold conferences in order to have quite a propaganda. We know that the center of the Muslim Brotherhood was in Egypt at the time, and they attracted a lot of people, and they went to a new level. They started influencing the people. Then they tried as much as possible to destabilize the people, and we know what happened to the revolution there. And we know how they moved outside of Egypt and worked on the religious groups that were already established in Egypt and that have moved to the Muslim world. And this is a certain aspect of a propaganda in order to be able to work on their objectives. After that, they moved to the embassies as well as the intelligence services and the communication services. And they headed to Europe and to America after invading the Arab world through Muslim charities. And this is quite dangerous. We know that there were a lot of celebrities that were saying that the liberal or the secular or the intellectual were saying this is a miscreant that should be killed. And this is why a lot of people that were enlightened were incapable of shedding their speech, because they tried to corner them as much as possible and they terrorized them. And we need to know. I'm sorry, Dr. Muhammad, you still have 1 minute. This was only the introduction. This is quite an important subject. I'm sorry, but we can't dwell more on that. I will try as much as possible to be brief. They use as much as possible their tools. They use the informants, spies. They send people working through governments. They use social media platforms. We had the Arab Spring as a result, which was a revolution on Facebook and social media platforms. There have also been the official statements made, and they were really good in their propaganda. They used the statements of the opposition that they aimed for reforms, and they adopted them. They were trying to use everything that the people demand. And we know how they toppled the government in order to be able to reach power. And they have also used all foreign intelligence services. We know the Muslim Brotherhood and other groups have led social media platforms through virtual accounts, and they are responsible for a lot of operations that happened. In brief, they succeeded because we failed them. Our media was absent. We were trying to sanctify these people and allow them to go on our media. Even our youth have sanctified them. The terrorist groups have used all these media platforms, and they use their speeches, and we forgot the love speeches as well as the narratives that gather people. But even through in our mosque, they called to the murder of miscreants. These were the speeches that were adopted, and unfortunately, polarizing the youth is quite an important subject. However, we have become enlightened, we have woken up, and now the intellectuals are again on the scene, and they are no longer afraid of the extremist political speeches, but now they are invading Europe and America. In our Arab countries, we are trying to warn Europe and the US from these groups. Before finishing, I would like to remind everyone that from Germany, the Muslim Brotherhoods and their groups from the Mosque of Munich control Lebanon, Iraq, and Syria. And from the UK, the Muslim Brotherhood controls what is happening in the Gulf countries and in Egypt and in Gaza. They also try to work on their own endeavors. In France, we know that the Muslim Brotherhoods also are capable of controlling Libya and Morocco and other countries. I really salute what the UAE has done, as well as everything that has been worked on in order to go over this terrorism, how they change all the speeches and narratives. And now we ask everyone to be brave and to talk about this Islamic political, about the political Islam that has polarized the people. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Muhammad Al-Mullah, for these clarifications that you have set forth. Just to remind you, in Trans, we have a major project that we are working on related to the Muslim Brotherhood, in order how they were established, what are their ideas, ideologies, and how they are working and how they are trying to recruit the youth. Thank you so much, Dr. Muhammad Al-Mullah. I now move on to our third speaker for today, Muhammad Khalfan Al-Sawafi, who is the director of the Parliamentary Media Department at the Federal National Council in the UAE. He is an Emirati journalist who has quite an important role in the Emirati and the Arab newspapers, and has also talked about the subject of political Islam. Today he is talking about a very important subject, which is the title of his intervention, Daesh from spreading ideology to the Caliphate on social media platforms. And his idea is that after Daesh has left its caliphate on the land, when it has annexed a lot of territory from Syria and Iraq, this group is trying to establish this caliphate on the internet. This is the cyber caliphate. I now give him the floor in order to be able to explain more about this idea. Thank you.
I thank Dr. Mohammed Al Ali, the CEO of Trent, and also I would like to thank Hamad Al Kaabi for giving us this opportunity to participate with this series of experts and intellectuals. Thank you very much. I would like to be very concise and precise. I will tackle 2 points. The first point is facts, and the second point is conclusions. And at the end of my presentation, I will make some conclusions. Of course, these facts are based on some realities and how ISIS turned from the first stage, which is the ground presence, to the cyber presence. I would like to say in the beginning that it is true that in 2018, Haidar al-Abadi announced the defeat of ISIS in the Levant and Iraq and Syria. And of course, after the killing of Baghdadi in Syria, these two incidents made everyone conclude that ISIS is over. But according to the research studies that tried to predict the future of ISIS, most of them didn't predict their future plans in the cyber platform. And of course, maybe there have been other factors that helped them to this internet presence. And because of their loss of the ground and land, they resorted to the internet in order to interact easily with the world. Second, the indicators and the crimes that have been committed in Germany and in France reflected that ISIS is still active in the virtual world. And this reflected also that the internet became a virtual land for the new Caliphate, who is Abu Ibrahim al-Qurayshi, which means that the plan took 2 stages and aimed to achieve 2 goals. First, operating the activities of ISIS and recruiting new funds and supporters after they lost a lot of combatants in Iraq and Syria. And the second thing that was concluded is that they started building the lone wolves, and these combatants are available whenever needed in order to commit crimes and strike in Europe and in different countries in the West. The third reality that I concluded from these studies is the fact that the orphans of ISIS is a potential project. They are meant to be soldiers for ISIS in the cyber environment, and now they started returning to their homelands. Russia just yesterday went to the camps in Syria and moved about 120 orphans who are the orphans of ISIS combatants. And also the same thing will be done by France and some European countries. So these individuals will be the new soldiers of ISIS in the near future, especially that a lot of children consider their parents who are combatant as an example, and they lived with them in this combating environment. So we have to take this into account when we tackle this topic and when we think in the future about how to protect our societies from these lone wolves and these ISIS orphans. The other thing I can conclude is that saying that the threat of ISIS is over on land and also on the virtual world is not accurate, because in the virtual world their presence is more dangerous, and this this is clearly manifested through the fact that this enemy, ISIS, in the virtual world is more dangerous because on the ground, inland, it is easy to combat them and confront them and control them. But in the virtual world, it's not easy. It's very difficult. The other thing I would like to share with you is that this abundance of sites in the virtual world gives the opportunity give the opportunity to ISIS and gives a challenge to the government of the world. And the other thing is that those who think that it is easy to counter the content of Clubhouse and some digital platforms. I think that it is a positive thing to counter their content, and we should continue that because using a Clubhouse is something neutral. It can be used negatively or positively, but the threat and the risk is how to use these platforms and apps. It's why it is important. Allow me to interrupt you. You have 1 minute left. So I will jump to the conclusion, which is we need cooperation between government and high-tech companies in order to collaborate further in setting policies to curb the misuse of these platforms and applications, especially those who use fake names and adopt these accounts. Thank you. Now we give the floor to Dr. Muhammad Al-Assoumi, who is a consultant and economist in the United Arab Emirates, and he will share with us other perspectives. Dr. Muhammad Al-Assoumi will shed light on another field of the misuse of the digital platforms and electronic applications, and he will shed light on the manipulation of the consumers' trends. And of course, this influence a lot of aspects of life. This data, when they fall in the hands of the extremists, they are used to blackmail the owners of this data. And this to achieve the agenda of these groups. And of course, I leave the floor to Dr. Muhammad Al-Assoumi to share with us his presentation. You have the floor, Doctor. Shall you unmute your microphone, Dr. Al-Assoumi? I would like to remind everyone that each guest has 10 minutes. Dr. Muhammad Al-Assoumi, you should unmute your microphone. Unfortunately, we cannot hear what Dr. Al-Assoumi is saying because he is muting his microphone. Dr. Al-Assoumi. So next to the camera, there is a little button which you can click. I think he is not listening to you because he is using his mobile. So I think he is done with the phone conversation. Sorry, gentlemen, for this little glitch. So I think I apologize for this glitch, and we will move to Dr. Omar Ad-Darai, member of the UAE Sharia Ifta Council in the United Arab Emirates. In this presentation, he will talk about the tools and ways to counter the extremist ideologies through the presentation of Dr. Omar Ad-Dar'i, entitled The Role of the Institutions to Raise Awareness Against the Spread of Extremism. And of course, in his summary, he will talk about immunization, what are the conditions and terms of this immunization, and also the pillars of that. So you have the floor, Dr. Omar Ad-Dar'i. In the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful. In the beginning, I would like to thank Trends Center and to Al Ittihad newspaper. I would like to wish you Ramadan Kareem. We hope that this holy month is a month of giving and blessing to all of you. Of course, when we talk about immunizing the peoples and communities from the threats and risks of extremism, we remain confused from where to start. But we have to take some guidelines that can help us pave the way to countering those extremists in the virtual world. Supposing that 2021 is without these platforms, how will be the reality of extremism and terrorism? This is just a hypothesis in order to trigger your imaginations and your minds, because we have to confess that in the last 10 years we made a tremendous effort to counter extremism and terrorism, but there has been domain that was left to extremists and that allowed them to return and to achieve some goals that they couldn't achieve in the past. This time they did that, not in the schools, universities, mosques, etc., but they did it in the virtual platforms, and they kidnapped the religion and incited hatred and violence, reaching explosions, etc. So we have to acknowledge that this extremist used to target the traditional places and venues. Now they use their ideologies in order to justify in an extremist way to react to any incident. And of course, we saw what they did when COVID-19 stroke. Immunization concept in language means securing something from something else in order to shield that person entity, and that person who is targeted is the generations, the societies, and the youth in particular. Why we immunize the youth? Because they are the pillar of the societies, they are the main targets by the extremists, and we have to protect them from these ideologies, and of course we have to immunize their personalities in order not to fall in these ideologies of these extremists and terrorists, and of course to prevent them from the manipulations of these groups which try to eradicate everything that is instinctive in our youth. We have to shield them from the atheism, and also from getting rid of the national invariables, and also we have to enable the youth to always be proud of the acquisitions of their nations and countries. Also, the strategy of immunization is based on 4 pillars. The first pillar is detecting and awareness and discovery. And this is the first line. It is the I that is caring of the people, and we have to raise awareness about the way of work and the functioning of these groups and what they circulate in these social platforms. There is a big ignorance among the audiences regarding these groups, and a lot of people don't know how these groups are misusing these platforms. The Muslim Brotherhood individual is a person that takes different shades and colors. They change their skin every time and then. It's why we have to get some detecting centers in order to detect preemptively those people and to take and assume this responsibility, and this should be assumed by the education and religious institutions in order to be able to cope with the ways of action of these extremists, because those use some closed circles and they have a concept that they use, which is tokia, meaning prevention, auto prevention, in order to camouflage and manipulate others. And the other thing, the second pillar, is the digital education. And of course, we have to acknowledge that we need to launch some specializations in the universities and educational institutions in order to raise awareness about the social media tools, the inconveniences and strengths, in order for them to use them in a way that serves the religion and the nation. The third pillar is the enrichment of values of moderation, and this necessitates enriching the intellect of the person, because the youth usually look for answers, and unfortunately these extremist groups grab them and radicalize them. It's why we have to ask the question, what are the concepts that are produced by these extremist groups using these tools in comparison with the moderate minds? And the reality shows that the social media produce a lot of falsified concepts. It's why we need some proper tools. Sorry to interrupt you. We have 1 minute. You have 1 minute left. I will conclude with the fourth pillar, which is introspection and prediction, in order to take action in advance and also to besiege those extremists intellectually, in order to eradicate all the phenomena of extremism in the virtual world. It's why we have to be preemptive and to have a legal system that is developed, that is renovated and renewable, in order to cope with this speed and the challenges. Thank you very much. So I think that these recommendations and suggestions are very important, and of course, at the end of the day, the immunization of societies and communities is very important and is the key. Allow me now to go back to Dr. Muhammad Al-Asumi. As I said in the beginning, he will tackle a related topic and an important topic in our discussion, which is the misuse of the digital platforms and electronic applications, and especially trading and manipulating the data of the consumers. Dr. Muhammad Al-Asumi, you have the floor. Thank you very much. In the beginning, I would like to take this.
This is quite an important and vital subject that we will be tackling. In short, I will be talking about three major axes. The first is related to the funding of terrorism. Second, the promoting terrorism. Three, fraud, because without any funding, we wouldn't have known that there are terrorist operations. So when we look at the centers of these groups, whether it's Daesh or other groups, we know that one of the most important measures that are doing is try to control the economic institutions in the Arab countries. For example, we know that their groups work through banks. Daesh in Syria tried as much as possible to monopolize all the oil fields. So without any funding, it is quite difficult to talk about terrorism. There is also quite an important subject, which is social media platforms. Why? Because these groups are now using cryptocurrencies in order to receive funding. And we know that cryptocurrencies are quite dangerous, notably bitcoins. They have funding that it is from sources that is difficult to detect. Before that, we could follow up a trail, but now through cryptocurrencies, it's quite difficult to know where this funding is coming. Thus, this is quite a dangerous manner that we need to delve more into. There's also promoting ideas and ideologies. And promoting charities through social media platforms. We know that there are a lot of charities that are working as a cover and taking a lot of donations. And now suggesting to have donations, and then they have millions of dollars that they receive through these groups and through social media platforms and others. And we know that this is a very important issue that we need to focus on. And I believe that the UAE has had a very rich experience in how to stop donations and funding that we need to benefit from. Third, fraud. We know that the fraud happens through bank accounts, through credit cards. In 2006, for example, the fraud amounts reach $52 billion only in the Middle East. In 2017, this was $60 billion. Last year, it was $65 billion. And some frauds are being conducted through these terrorist groups. In addition to that, they try to misuse social media platforms in order to traffic illicit substances. It is known that Muslim Brotherhood and Daesh and even Hezbollah traffic drugs as well as illicit items. This is a matter that we need to focus on and be aware of. They also deal in steroids and in other substances. This is quite dangerous for the youth. Now they also try to promote a lot of substances that will lead to the death of the youth, as well as to having dangerous diseases. So these are three major axes that are quite important, and we need to focus on and combat. The solution is quite difficult, but through the difficult laws that we have, we know that the UAE has a very important experience in that field. Thank you so much, Dr. Mohammed. And you really shed light on it through the use of cryptocurrencies, bitcoins, and how they're being transformed, and how the terrorist groups might be able to use these currencies. Thank you so much. We now move on to our last participant, Dr. Ashraf Al-Aisawi, who's the media advisor at Trans Research and Advisory. Dr. Ashraf Al-Aisawi has largely contributed, whether in political analysis, and has a very important presence, and he will be talking about the role of educational and media institution in immunizing the people from social media platforms and the misuse of these platforms and apps. So I now give the floor to Dr. Ashraf Al-Aisawi. Thank you so much for you. It is really quite a privilege for me to be amongst you in order to discuss one of the major issues that the country and the region is facing. And apps and digital platforms to the threat of extremist misuse. Before I start talking about the importance of schools, let me talk about the features that these social media platforms and how they are being used. There's an increase in the users of social media platforms, and this has increased exponentially during the previous years. And the latest figures show that there are today more than 10 billion accounts on the social media platform, which is more than the world population. And it is clear that there is an exponential increase in the users of social media platforms. The very quite important feature that we have is that there are expectations to increase those users by around 1 billion users. When it comes to the Arab world, there are very important figures, because we know that the social media platforms users have reached 100 million people, and 69% of the youth in the Arab countries are on social media platforms. So this gives us a picture of how the social media platforms have become the strategic use of all these groups in order to use. There are different features that improve the use of social media platforms in order to spread the extremist ideologies, including how easy it is to impact and influence people. We know that there are no restraints on internet, and we know that these social media platforms are mostly free. So as soon as someone has an account on Facebook and Twitter, he can put any content that he wants, whether terrorist or not, without any restraints. We also know that there's a lot of interaction and reactions on social media platforms. So when a person wants to spread an idea, it can go viral and spread quite easily. This is why apps and digital platforms really are the best tool for these groups in order to spread their terrorist and extremist ideologies around the world. Now, it is necessary to work with the society in order to eradicate all the ideas that are promoted through these platforms. And we need as much as possible to immunize the people, and this should be through the local, official, and regional and religious institutions. I believe that Dr. Omar has given us an idea about the role of the religious institutions in immunizing their people. This is why I now focus on media and the schools and the role that they can play in immunizing the people. In media, there is no doubt that the media is really the spearhead of all the programs we can work on in order to stop the spread of ideologies through social media platforms. There are several stages that we can use in that. One, the media can help really try to sensibilize the people and about how dangerous some ideas can be, and notably when we have unknown contents that are trying to recruit the youth and spreading their ideas. It is also quite important for the pertinent media institutions, whether that's written media or visual media, in order to train the youth on how to focus on how people can be able to spread the content on the social media platforms. We also know that the media can try as much as possible to enlighten the population and also highlight what are the false ideas that are spread through social media platforms and they do not represent or reflect the social values of the community as well as maybe the religion and the other aspects. The media institutions also need to host several intellectuals as well as religious figures and clerks in order to be focusing on how not to misuse ideologies. The media institutions can also focus on what are the positive values such as tolerance and moderation. And we know that these institutions can really stop and combat the ideological dangerous ideologies, because we know that social media platforms does not play a patriotic role, and this is why we need to stop them, and this is why we need to create really a structure that will help the media into consolidating these ideas. If the social media platforms are being used in order to spread the terrorist ideologies, we can use these same platforms in order to face that. And we know that the UAE has different centers, such as the SWAB, which was established in 2015 in order to face false ideas and misinformation, and on social media platforms in order to hear the moderate voices and to stop all the extremists. When it comes to the role of educational institution, I do believe that they are considered some of the pillars of the society, and they play a pioneering role in stopping the ideologies. Dr. Ashraf, you still have 2 minutes. If you can move on to your conclusion. I believe that the school institutions are really the pillar in order to immunize the populations and can play an important role. And maybe we can also design a certain structure that will help the people and the students from going towards extremist ideas. And we know that there has been experience that has been used for 3 years now, and try to raise awareness of the people and focus on the positive values such as tolerance, moderation, and others. One of the other points that these groups can do is that the teachers are considered a cornerstone in these educational institutions, and they can try as much as possible to have a very moderate narrative and stop the spread of any ideologies. If these teachers have been trained, they will really be the person that will stop any ideologies that might spread on social media platforms, and at the same time they will immunize the students from any ideas. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Ashraf, for this intervention. You really tackled a lot of elements that you might add in order to combat extremist ideologies. From that, we have finished all the interventions, and now we will start the Q&A. Usually, if one of the participants wanted to ask a question to one of his colleagues, he will be able to do that. I already have received the 2 questions. The first is related to the intervention. And the idea was debated because it was also configured in the interventions of others. And this was the main idea, which is the moral army. So it is not only necessary to stop these groups through legal manners and matters, and by trying as much as possible to use only the security aspect, but in addition to that, it was necessary as much as possible to immunize the people by having a moral army, so the people themselves who will be able to stop these groups. And this should have been an individual initiatives, because it's a double-edged sword and we can be discussed furthermore. So when talking about the moral army, we know that this army also might have ideas that might be quite different from the ideas that you yourself are trying to defend. So maybe, Doctor, you can answer this question and give us further details about that. As for the other question that has already been asked to me, so the first was more of a comment in the form of a question, but the second is related to a general question, which goes as follows. With the rapid pace of social media platforms, as well as the apps that are now available and they are being developed each and every year, what is the guarantee to know that these we can be able to stop these extremist groups? In other words, there's a major technological development that might find a solution to a certain aspect, and what are the individual initiatives that can be taken in order to stop these groups from being able to propagate their own ideas and ideologies? So if I can now ask one of the colleagues to answer these questions and comment on them.
So, of course, anyone is invited to answer this question. Mr. Muhammad, to answer your question, I think it is the responsibility of the heads of social media like Facebook or Clubhouse. When an extremist group uses their platforms, they should close their accounts. And we know that the management is in the US mainly, and we know what happened in the elections. There was an action by the far right groups, and there was an investigation in the Congress. So it is the responsibility of Facebook and other platforms. When ISIS emerged, who transferred them to the Arab world? Who spread their crimes and shared these crimes with the Arab world? I think that it is their responsibility. Now, in each single social media, if you write ISIS, of course, this should be detectable, and the owners of the high tech and the social media platforms should monitor this. Regarding this enlightenment vision and progressivity, etc., we have to return to these values, because we have religion, we have science, we have progress. We resort only to religion in some form, and we forget the science. The Arab countries do not cope with the rhythm of sciences and technologies. The United Arab Emirates, when it embraced the use of the nuclear energy, it wanted to explore science and start the steps of progress and the scientific discoveries. It's why we see that the United States is using GPS, the internet, and a lot of tools. They discovered a lot of things, and the Pentagon is discovering a lot of things in order to serve their nations. As Mr. Ashraf said, the education systems and curricula should be reformed in order to reflect that on countering terrorism and extremism. The United Nations should adopt this new vision. All the countries should embrace that in order to counter extremism. But the question, can I add something? I believe that raising awareness is clear, because in social media there will be more awareness about that. So our conscious and awareness is our weapon. Either you are a government or any other entity. The extremists, they are experts in manipulation and circulating the lead in news and information. Dr. Ashraf? I think also that the international collaboration in countering extremism is very important and crucial because we should have a conformity about this issue. Some countries have taken very serious steps. On the other hand, other countries they are very negligent. They allow different platforms to the extremists and to the spread of extremism without any monitoring. It's why I do believe that we need an international collaboration and cooperation under the umbrella of the United Nations, and we should have an ethical framework that govern our conducts and practices, and we should hold accountable those who violate these values. Thank you very much. We will take the comment of Mr. Al-Mullah. You talked about the intellectuals and their roles. Their role in producing a convincing speech, and you say the scientific speech. But we do notice that a lot of things do not match with this description. In the United Arab Emirates, for instance, there are institutions and many intellectuals in Islam and in other religions who circulate some propagandas which are different and that are refuting the simple rhetoric of the Muslim Brotherhood and extremist groups. But we do not find that everywhere in all the Arab world. There are paradoxical visions. There are some intellectuals who try to be rational and generate a new trend of thinking, but I think that we need to connect the dots. What do you think, Mr. Al-Mullah? To be honest, those who nurtured the hatred speech is a very old culture, and the problem lies in the exploitation of some Islamic countries. Their use of this in order to remain in power. That's the major problem because nurturing the hatred speech and interfering in the sovereignty of others is having one unique agenda, which is keeping that leader in power. It's why we have to acknowledge that our Arab and Islamic countries are open now. I agree with Mr. Khalfan. Honestly, the platforms cannot be controlled unless we have awareness, education, and also mobilize the intellectuals who spread tolerance, moderation, rapprochement with the peoples and communities, and also implementing the peace values. These are the slogans, by the way, of the United Nations. Most countries raise these slogans, but what is the reality? If we look at the hatred speech and the incitement to violence and killing as a result of the support of some institutions to these speeches and rhetoric, who is inciting to violence and hatred? We can find these people having millions of followers, and this scholar or a doctor who has a few dozens of followers. So what is the responsibility of the United Nations, of the government? I think that we should lead by example. The superpowers should be the example for peace so that this peace is spread around the world. If we are really serious when we talk of rapprochement, it should be embraced by the superpowers. We see the international community, the European Union, the United Nations, they interfere in order to counter poverty. They should do the same and enough work in order to embody a vision that is international and not restricted to this country or the other. We should have a joint effort if we want to really go far. And of course, everyone knows what I'm talking about. Mr. Mohammed, there is a if there is a colleague who want to add anything, because I would add a last question, which is complementing my previous question, which is what are the factors that make the propaganda and the speech countering the extremist speech is not that efficient and is not that attractive compared to the extremist rhetoric. And of course, this overlaps with my previous question. Why the speech that is countering the rhetoric is not very efficient? I mean, what makes the extremist speech more attractive and more seductive? What makes them away from the rational speech? Is there any chemistry that exists in the extremist rhetoric? Of course, the extremist speech is simplistic and nurtures on the daily suffering of people. We know that. It's why framing this propaganda and rhetoric reaches a lot of audiences. However, the rational speech is a scientific one. It's why maybe it is less attractive compared to the simplistic rhetoric. Allow me, doctor. Yes, Dr. Mohammed. Yes, I agree with you. The moderate speech is weak in countering the extremist speech. But if we look at the terms of the extremist propaganda, they nurture on the suffering of people and they amplify them, they amplify the suffering of the poor, of the jobless people, and they use that and they package them in a way that incites the citizens against their government. And of course, there was laxation in the beginning by the promoters of the moderate speech. They were behind or in the back benches or at least silent. Now I think that changes started to happen. If we go back 2 years back, we will find that a lot of extremist voices became less strong, and of course this is thanks to the awareness. Now a lot of extremists started to be concerned. They use actually the virtual world, but they do not dare to go to all the places because they are countered there, and we should always have political support. Allow me to add something, please. I think that it is about racism. The racism is the main reason of extremism. When you have racism in every society, you destroy everything you build. You preach peace and you have tribalism, that is refused. You have doctrination, that's refused. You don't coexist with others, so you don't echo with your people. And if you go to all the wars in the old history and the modern history, the reason for these wars was racism. Thank you very much, Doctor. I would like to thank each and every one of you for your valuable input, for your valuable time, for sharing your presentations with us in this very important topic. It seems that there is a consensus on the description of the cyber action, the thing that it is very dangerous, and that the rhetoric embraced by the extremist Islamic groups. Sorry, it seems that I'm thirsty and I'm fasting and my throat is dry already. Anyway, uh, despite the tremendous effort of the government, including the United Arab Emirates, in order to counter the cyber extremism, a lot of cyber sites have been launched. It's why we have to be preventive and we have to immunize and shield our communities. We have to raise awareness in a moderate way, educate people about the moderate values, and also to mobilize the elite and intellectuals in order to counter this extremist rhetoric. I thank you very much, and I would like to remind you that we will have an event very soon in May the 4th at 12 noon, and we will talk about the sustainability. And of course, this will be at noon. Thank you very much. I thank everyone in the Gulf countries and in UAE. Thank you. See you in the next events. Thank you very much. And I thank also Al-Ittihad newspaper for this opportunity of partnership and cooperation. Thank you very much, Doctor. We thank you very much. Thank you very much, Asumi, Muhammad Al-Mulla, Dr. Ashraf Al-Aisawi, and on behalf of Trend Research and Advisory, I thank you, Hamad Al-Ka'bi, for hosting us in the first Al-Ittihad Ramadan Majlis. I hope that this fruitful partnership between our institutions continue through the organization of other symposiums. I hope that the colleagues who are following us have benefited from these presentations, and I promise that we will organize similar symposiums that tackle the problems and issues of our societies, either in the United Arab Emirates or in the GCC countries or in the Arab world. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Mohammed. I thank all the speakers because honestly, their discussions have been very rich. I hope that we have more time, and I would like to um, transfer to you and convey to you the greetings of our colleague. Thank you very much for your perfect organization. Thank you for your valuable input, and we wish to see you very soon in the discussion of other topics. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Mohammed, for your coordination efforts. Thank you very much, Mr. Mohammed. Thank you, dear brothers.